if you're on the Pacific coast in North America, where I am, it's afternoon. So hope you're all having a great afternoon. Thank you for joining us for the Sci-Fi and Fantasy reading. I am author MD New, and I am with some of my fellow authors. So I'm going to be doing double duty. I am not only hosting this, but I will be also doing a little bit of a reading. So if you've been to some of our other panels and other readings, same type of idea here. We're going to have everybody introduce themselves, and then we'll jump right into the readings. Then we will go into some Q&A. So Emily, let's start with you.
Sure. I'm Emily. I write as E.D.E. Bell, and I write generally quiet fantasy. And I also run the small press Athos Arts. And I'm here just outside of Detroit, Michigan. So it's nice to see everybody. I'm imagining I'm seeing you. Just we'll go with that.
Ava, let's hit you next.
Hi, I'm Ava. I write science fiction and fantasy. And I'm here in Romania, where it's 11 p.m. right now. Very, very dark outside, very, very dark inside, very, very dark my shirt. So keeping with a gothic theme, remember this for the reading.
Great. And Sera, how about you?
I am Sera Trevor. I write MM romance, and I live in Southern California, so also on the Pacific coast, and I have a husband, 2 kids, and 2 cats, and I write a little bit of everything. I write, but my favorite is fantasy. But I will be reading from my paranormal book today, which I think is related. So
nice. Well, as I said at the beginning, I am author MD New. I live here in San Jose, California, which is on the Pacific coast of North America. And I write urban fantasy, paranormal, and sci-fi. And today I will be reading from my sci-fi series, A New World, Book 2, Conviction. However, I'm not going to start the reading. We're going to go around the world, as in at least how I'm looking at it. So we'll start with Emily.
All right, I can do this. So I'm E.D.E. Bell, as just discussed, and I am going to be reading today from my 10 novella serial Diamond Song, which was, something that at the time I was ambitious enough to attempt, but it will be my one and only 10 novella serial. But I am very fond of it, and I thought it would be nice to read from it today. It's actually hard to read from because I normally read the interludes. There's flash interludes throughout each of the novellas because they're very, very readable and short, and they're complete little stories. But I didn't want to do that today. I wanted to do something different and actually read from the main plot of the story. And I decided to read something that's a little different for me, that's a little more about the characters and not so much the world of the magic. And I don't know, it was the mood that I'm in today, so we're going to do it. And in my short pitch for Diamond Song is, if you'd like something to dig into, because it's got, it's a little bit long, it's long, definitely a long form writing, gentle with characters to love, and a focus on kindness and chosen family with a little bit of humor, hopefully, I hope you will give it a look. So the setup for this would be, this is from part 8, so the setup would be me telling you about the first 7 novellas. So instead of doing that, I'll do the short version. So the main character, Dime, whose name is Diamond, had met up with an old flame that was actually an old coworker, but they had dated for a while. And the job they were in, it's in a fantasy world, but it's essentially like government intelligence work, but very different in this world. And a long time has passed in Dime's mind. She's married, they have children, and she feels like her world has very much changed since then. In this scene, and you just have to go with it for the premise of this short reading, they're hiding at the edge of the trees outside of the main ferry government complex, waiting for the high clerk to show up, and because they want to try to talk to him. And we will start there. Flip over this file. Okay. They sat a while longer, Dime not sure what to do with the silence. So this is old school, she finally said, watching a few ferries leave after their shift, but not seeing any enter. You and me, staking out a place for an interview? The leaves rustled above them. Rock didn't answer. Dime started to worry something was wrong when her friend suddenly blurted out, I felt awful about what I said earlier, the part about loving you. How are we supposed to have a friendship when I throw that sort of thing at you when you're just trying to talk about birds? I'm really happy to see you again. And you and Dane have made an amazing family. I've just grown old and weird. Rock turned to more of an angle, holding her knees tight against her chest. You never even said goodbye. You never dropped me a note. You were just gone. And I feel ridiculous now talking about this like I'm some smitten Aok. I'm sitting here endangering our friendship because I can't control my harmed off mouth. I just want to promise you that I'll fix it. Now. And I'm sorry. Oh. What was Dime supposed to say to that? She supposed she should say something. Her heart sort of turned over in her chest, and well, she knew why. This wasn't any surprise. Dime had felt a little the same way. Rock had shown up out of nowhere, older, funnier, and more beautiful than Dime had remembered her. Not to be superficial, or maybe beauty wasn't even the right word. She exuded warmth and strength. She made Dime feel like things would be better, like something had returned to her that had been lost. She couldn't say any of this, for many reasons. She couldn't say none of it either. Rock forced a smile, though not looking at Dime. Oh, Soul D, it's enough. I've apologized. There's nothing more to say. If you're willing to be friends, or if you'd rather not, I understand, and there's no hard feelings. I'll still help where I can. I'll work with the free winds if I can't work with DC. Batu is amazing. We've connected. She could get me in the right group. Dime spoke slowly. You've hurt nothing in our relationship. I will be friends with you if you will be friends with me. I can't. She knew whatever Rock couldn't say, it wasn't that they couldn't be friends. I feel ridiculous. Dime stared at her a long moment. You are the least ridiculous purr I have ever met. Rock shook her head. No, really. She might as well go there. Dane once took 10 full turns to build a mantle for the fireplace. The living area was a mess the entire time. I had to wipe wood dust off the tabletop with a wet towel just to enjoy a book. She stopped, not sure why the mantle had come to mind. That is actually ridiculous. Rock smiled, and it seemed more natural than before. He seemed really great during our brief conversation. This isn't about that. You know that. I know. I actually think he understands. Her eyes clouded. Understands? He said it was okay that I still had feelings for you and that he trusted me. Rock spun around. Wait, here I am making torn pants of myself for your amusement and whispering that I love you on our flying couch, and the whole time you told your spouse you still have the hots for me? I did not say that. Harm it, Rock, however you want to say it. Yes, I like you. You like me. I'm a one-spouse purr, and I love the one that I have. And when you ran off in the woods, Harm's uncle, can we be friends or not? Rock tapped the ground. Here's my proposal. Oh, that's not right. Here's my idea. We aren't going to have a hug moment because we already shared the flying chair, so there's no point. But we can perhaps agree on a bridge or something, and then Dime couldn't look Rock's way, but she reached out her hand and held it next to Rock's. It was hard not to jump when she felt Rock's soft, bony fingers weave into hers. And they sat there at the edge of the forest, quiet amongst the chirps and creaks, with their fingers softly intertwined. And she held on a little longer, a little like she'd never left. And, okay, that's good, Rock said, popping her hand away. I'm over it now. Thanks for the talk. I pledge to stay friends, no more weird, and still the separate chair and or roomy bench contract. Somewhere in the warm and not feeling weird at all smile that they shared, and the peace of the next take or two, there was a commotion of guards rising to their feet. Tikinal! Dime said it aloud, but glanced over to see the fairy with his sweeping robes and distinctive knot of hair had already landed on the path's main loop and was walking toward the arch. Kilbird, we were supposed to be watching for that, Rock whispered. What sort of blurtball agents are we? Are you a cheaper? Dime hissed, scrambling to remember what she had planned to do. At heart, Rock whispered. Say something. Brooms stink, she called out in a high, chirpy voice, and whatever she'd meant to do, it was done so poorly that pretty much every guard craned in their direction. As Tikinel scrambled to regain the guard's attention, Dime and Rock pressed flat into the ground with Rock's eyes wide in humor or scolding or who knew. A take later, the guards were back in position, and if looking a little antsy, Tikinal had launched back into the sky. I see why they put you at a desk, Rock said. If they hadn't, I wouldn't know the high clerk. Got me there. And when their eyes met, something became right. And that is it. That's what I have. So, thank you. That's from Diamond Song, Part 8, Leap. But you should probably start at Part 1 if you want to enjoy it.
Very, very cool. Ava, you want to go next? You're muted. Ava, you're muted.
Yes, I said sure, I can go next. We can do fantasy, science fiction, or as it were paranormal. So my story is sci-fi, and it's from this wonderful anthology. It's called A Community of Magic Pens, and it's a book with many stories about pens and pencils and various interpretations of what we can do with them. Look, I have a pencil here. It says pen friend. And I have something here that I used to grade papers with and ruin lives. No, I'm kind to my students. But pens are very powerful, and writing this particular story was very personal to me because it's a story in which I incorporated a very happy moment in my life. And it's science fiction, so it's amazing. Now, imagine yourself living in a world that is very, very drab and very, very gray. It's in a not so distant future where we live in a megapolis because there is just so much of us, so many of us, right? And of course, a lot of people are poor, and a few lucky ones are rich because, this is the world. But in this world, a confessionist is a person who is equipped with neural implants and can go extract difficult memories from people, to mute them, to scar them over so that people can move on with their lives past trauma and so on. So in this story, the confessionist, Vemund, a confessionist, arrives at a client who has offered a lot of money for the next confession. A smiling man answers the door at the first ring. Medium build, a little shorter than Vemund, clean-shaven, wearing a dark sweater, the same grey of the concrete and the sky and the house he occupies. Hi, I'm Obe. Please, come in. Obe keeps smiling and Vemund shudders. He's never been afraid before. After removing his shoes and coat, Vemund follows further inside. When instructed, he sits at the dining table. Its glass surface shines pristine, just like everything else in this place. The space is wide and open, any separation made from transparent material. No color, no personal touch whatsoever. Even the tray with tea that Obe sets on the table permeates sameness. While he pours and serves, Vemund retrieves his tools from the briefcase. He sets them down on a paper pad between them after Obe takes the opposite seat. He's dropped his facade of hospitality, instead studying the items with an intensity Vemund's rarely seen before. The pulsars, Vemund begins the requisite explanation, opening the small box to reveal the round neuroactuators. Go on your temples. I've done this before. They modify the neural connections, forming the memory that I wrote down. Obe picks up the pen, twists it around. With this thing, coated in enough sensors to read my mind. Vemund swallows, loud enough in the silence that Obe notices. He leans over the table slightly. Your implant will absorb my experience as if it were your own, and what remains will be distant for me, like a scar over a healed wound. That's how it works. Vemund's voice cracks, but Obe doesn't comment on that, so Vemund counts his lucky stars and tries to move forward. How long ago was your last procedure? If less than a year, I'm afraid we can't continue at this time. Health concerns, you see. Leaning back in his chair, Obe gestures at the tea and Vemund shakes his head. I was a child back in the Tsar Boroughs, Obe finally says. I had witnessed a terrible thing during the riots. It left me distraught. No, damaged. I was damaged. In fact, it was you who confessed it. I'm sorry, Vemund interrupts. You must be mistaken. I've never treated a boy in Tsar. A right twist of lips and Obe's eyes darken in the lowering light. Yes, you did. It clicks immediately. Vemund's perspective shifts from dread towards curiosity. My apologies. One should never assume, least of all me. Unnecessary, Obe says, lifting a long finger hand. You've been in my head, but couldn't have seen what I wasn't aware of at the time. Understanding came later for me. Vemon nods. The tea by his elbow steams a gentle aroma, and despite himself, he picks up the cup, takes a sip under Obe's assessing gaze. Obe should be uncomfortable. The confession always is, and yet here, in this cold, grey house, the new information soothes something long torn beneath Vemon's skin. The first to break the stillness is Obe, who attaches the pulsars to his temples. Vemon's pet swishes over the glass as Obe pulls it closer. It's part of why you're here, really, he says. You gave me serenity, peace of mind. He bends over the paper, smoothing it out with his thumb. The other clicks on the power button of the pen, and Vemon's implant fires. His eyelids flutter until the connection finally settles. Eyes downcast, Obe breathes in deeply, his growing confidence resonating through the uplink. I wanted to thank you. Easing my pain gave me clarity and presence. It allowed me to learn and live and make something of myself. It let me discover who I am, what I want, what I love, how to love, both myself and others. The tip of the pen touches the paper. It was spring, March 12th. At that time, I was exploring what it meant to be me. Half worried, half excited, a lot afraid. Didn't feel comfortable in public, didn't want to explain myself again. I remember trees in bloom in the park. It wasn't that warm outside, but the sun was shining that day and I'd missed it. So I went to sit on a bench in the farthest corner I could find, hoping nobody would see me, wishing to remain invisible. A woman strolled by at some point. She had long grey hair, wrinkles on her entire face, a large hat with a red bow shielding her from the sunshine. She asked, do you have the time, young man? I recall experiencing true, pure joy. It was the most vivid moment of absolute and sincere happiness I have ever felt. Vemund gasps as Obe's intense memory gathers in a knot in the middle of his chest. Across the table, Obe sets the pen down, eyes back on Vemund. Now, we share it. Thank you for listening.
Oh, you should have told me. I didn't know I can read tissue tradition. It's so beautiful. Sorry. Woo.
No, thank you so much. It just
Okay. I'm smear my mascara here.
now I'm gonna cry.
It looks like Sera froze a second. Oh, there they are.
Hi, I'm back.
Excellent. So you ready to are you ready to do your reading?
Yes, I am. I'm going to be reading from Curses Foiled Again, which is my paranormal book. I also have several fantasy titles, but this opening scene is one of my favorites, and since it is the opening to the book, I won't have to give anybody any background, so we'll just dive into it. All right. Chapter 1, The Witch Boy of Sunset Boulevard. Someone smelled delicious. Felix really ought to have been sated. He had fed that night already, but in spite of his satiety, the new aroma tempted him like nothing before. It was the same dark tang that normally inspired his appetite, but with a sweet note buried in the scent. Like an orange at the peak of its sweetness, right on the cusp of rotting. It didn't take him long to discover the source of the aroma. It was a young man in a hooded sweatshirt making his way down Sunset Boulevard. He walked with remarkable confidence for being on his own at 2 o'clock in the morning. Felix grinned. He liked the confident ones. Their shock when confronted with the likes of him was always amusing. He raced ahead of the young man with superhuman swiftness, jumping in front of him with his fangs bared. Felix loved this part right before the attack, the moment when human confusion and animal terror mixed together as his victim realized their fate. Any moment now he would scream, or at least he would try to, but by then it would be too late. The young man jumped and inhaled sharply at Felix's sudden appearance. But once he'd given Felix a good once-over, he let out his breath in a relieved puff. There was no screaming, no futile attempt to flee or freezing in terror. In fact, it was Felix who froze in place, confused by the young man's strange reaction. As Felix tried to gather his wits to think of what to do next, the young man brushed past him and continued on. Felix shook himself out of his muddle. He brought a hand up to his mouth, feeling to make sure that his fangs were still bared. They were. Perhaps the young man hadn't seen him clearly. The lighting was particularly poor, and mortal vision was not very good. He zipped ahead of the young man and jumped out at him again, making sure that he was directly under a streetlight. He raised his arms and hissed for good measure. "You can stop doing that," the young man said. "I'm not afraid of you." "Oh, really?" Felix sneered, although in all honesty he was taken aback. "Well, we'll see if your bravery lasts when I sink my fangs into your yielding flesh." He attempted to pounce, but nothing happened. He tried again, but his limbs just wouldn't cooperate. As he stood there in confusion, the young man stepped around him and continued walking. Once Felix had collected himself, he set out after the young man again, this time trotting beside him. The young man paid him no attention. "Have you put a spell on me?" "No." "Well, then why can't I attack you?" "Because I'm not afraid of you," he said. He wasn't even looking at Felix. Vampires can only attack people who fear them. Felix scoffed. "Oh, that can't be true." "Well, think about it. Can you ever remember a time when a potential victim wasn't afraid of you?" "Well, not that I recall." "Well, then if you only ever confronted people who were afraid of you, how would you have found out if you couldn't attack someone who wasn't?" Felix turned that over in his mind. It did make a certain amount of sense. They continued to walk together. Felix tried to startle him a few more times, hoping it would raise enough fear for Felix to strike, but it didn't work. The young man's face remained expressionless, as if Felix wasn't even there. He was a remarkably good-looking fellow, with sandy blonde hair and blue eyes. He was so pleasant to look at that Felix eventually ceased his efforts to frighten him in favor of simply gazing at him. His sweatshirt was not zipped all the way, but the t-shirt underneath was too baggy to give even a suggestion of the body it concealed. He wished the young man would take it off, or at the very least remove the hood. After some time, they came to an apartment building. The young man approached with one of the doors on the first floor. "Well, I would say it's nice to meet you, but it wasn't really," he said as he took out his keys. "Good night." He unlocked the door. Felix blocked the door with his body, preventing the young man from entering. "You've let me straight to where you live," he said in his scariest voice. "I could strike you when you least expect it. In your very home. Certainly that will frighten you enough for me to attack." "Vampires can't enter a home unless you invite them in. Did you really think I wouldn't know that?" Felix scowled. "How do you know all this?" "None of your business. Now, unless you want to stand around here until dawn, get your hand off my door and go away." "Well, maybe I do want to stand here," Felix said. "You can't make me leave." The young man rolled his eyes. "Fine." He leaned against the wall a few steps away from the door and took a pack of cigarettes and a silver lighter out of the pocket of his hooded sweatshirt. He perched a cigarette between his pink lips and lit it. Felix remained where he was. The young man didn't even spare him a glance as he smoked his cigarette, gazing instead at the smoke as it left his lips and dissipated into the night air. Felix felt annoyed. Surely he was more interesting than a cloud of smoke. "Why are you out alone so late?" Felix asked. "While you may not be afraid of vampires, you are still vulnerable to mortal attacks." An idea flashed through Felix's mind. "What if I got a gun? Would you be afraid of me then?" The young man rolled his eyes. "Why are you so intent on killing me?" "I don't want to kill you. I want to drink your blood." "And that's not the same thing?" Felix had to think about it. "No, I don't think it is," he said. "It's true that my victims swoon, but I'm fairly certain they survive." The young man raised an eyebrow. "You don't know for sure?" "Oh, there isn't much reason for me to linger after I've fed, is there?" "I guess not." He took another long drag of his cigarette. "Why do you want to drink my blood? You've already fed tonight." Felix looked at him with surprise. "How do you know that?" "You've got blood on your chin." Felix wiped his face with the back of his hand that wasn't holding the door shut. Sure enough, it came away red. "Doesn't that make you feel at least a little bit scared?" he asked plaintively. The young man finished his cigarette with one final inhale, dropped the butt on the street, and then stubbed it out with his toe. "Sorry to say, but it takes a lot more to make me feel anything at all." He pulled out his pack of cigarettes again and took one. "Would you like one?" The young man offered the pack and his lighter. Felix stared at the cigarettes, and then back at his face. The young man put his hand further down. "Come on, take one." Felix frowned, wondering at this young man's sudden generosity. John stood just out of reach, so Felix had to step closer to accept the pack and the lighter. Felix's fingers brushed over the skin of the young man's hand. It was so warm. "Thank you," Felix said, a little dazed. "No problem." The young man's smile was dazzling. Felix smiled back and turned his attention to the pack of cigarettes, pulling one out and readying the lighter, and then quick as lightning, the young man slipped inside the apartment and slammed the door shut behind him. God damn it! Felix shouted after him, pounding at the door. Come back out here! There was no answer. Felix stomped around in a circle, cursing. Once he composed himself, he went back to the door. Well, I'm keeping your cigarettes and your lighter, and you'll never get them back. This also failed to get a response. Felix examined the lighter. On one side there was a figure etched into the metal, a dragon or demon, some mythical creature at any rate. On the other side there was an engraving, To John, Love Rob. A gift, then. Perhaps he could use its sentimental nature to his advantage. I really mean it, he shouted. I'll throw this lighter in the sewer. Still no response. With a huff, he zipped away, his preternatural speed meaning he only had to travel a few moments before he reached his estate in Beverly Hills, where he resided with his sister, Kat, and her husband, Richard. The sprawling wrought iron gates were shut, but unlike the young man's closed door, the gates posed no barrier to him. He launched himself upward and over the curled letters that spelled out the name of the estate, Happy Endings. Under it was the image of a boar cast in iron. The sign's rusted stake meant the promise of the words ring a bit false. Nevertheless, it was the only home he had, and he had no desire to meet the dog. The end of the first scene.
Excellent. Wow, that was really cool. I liked the whole
Thank you.
here, have a pack of cigarettes and a lighter, and zipped right into the house.
Clever.
That was good. That was really good. So today for my reading, I am going to be reading from my sci-fi series, A New World. I'm going to be reading from book 2, which is called Conviction. Basically, brief summary of the series is aliens arrive on Earth basically today, contemporary times, and we have to deal with it. We can't pretend that they don't exist because there they are. Their world has been destroyed, and they're looking for a new place to live, and they've come seeking our help and finding out that in the first book that we're not exactly the most welcoming of people, but you know, they deal with it and are trying to learn about our differences and learn about our similarities. You know, so that kind of gives you a background of the story. The main character is Todd. He is a human. The part that I'm going to be reading today is with Todd and Maiko, who is the vice speaker of the alien race, and the alien race are called the Nentri. They've been on our planet, or been hovering around our planet in their ships for about 3 or 4 months now. So yeah, so start off there. Okay. Maiko, Mr. Vice Speaker, may I ask you a question? Todd sat back in his seat. Of course, Maiko put down his glass. I don't want to offend you, but why am I here? Todd asked. I'm not a diplomat, I'm not a scholar, and I'm certainly not one of the great minds of our people. Maiko nodded with a polite smile. And not to mention, no one really wants me here except for maybe you and the Speaker General, Todd said. Hell, not even my own people want me here. Sure, everyone is pleasant enough and helpful when need be, but he frowned. Even Myson and Vinarm don't want me here. The tips of Maiko's ears turned blue and almost seemed to get bigger. Maiko said, Your government has concerns about our choice. He rubbed the tips of his ears, and the color and the swelling started to fade. Putting it delicately, Todd laughed. And my son and Vinarm have also made their opinions clear on that matter. I apologize if this has made you uncomfortable. Maiko turned to the bookshelf at his side. There's a book, he pointed on the shelf. Lena pulled it down for me to review. It was the night I wrote the declaration that allowed you to come here and possibly stop an armed conflict between our two people. It was Todd's turn to nod. Todd, our two cultures are very different, Maiko said. Even among your world, with so many different cultures, we find ourselves with little to compare to. He stopped. I didn't lie to you when we talked of this at the hospital. It is a challenge to find the correct words. Well, Todd said, I've done hours of research on this special envoy position. and I haven't found anything about it. Maiko shook his head. Nor would you. This data was not part of our cultural information provided to your people. This honor predates the clan war and many of our current laws. It is, as you would say, outdated. The clan wars. So, before your world's great war, Todd said, he had learned the clans were basically the various Nentri races. However, prior to the clan war, they rarely mixed. It was because of this isolationist ideology the clans went to war. A global race war, Todd thought. You've done your research, Maiko said. Well, before the war, in order to try to build peace among our people and within the clans themselves, we would have a special envoy from different warring factions. Our clans were small, not like what we have now. So there were subgroups within these clans that didn't always get along. The envoy would live and work with the group to understand them, how they live, how they raised their families, how they worshipped. The envoy would learn what it was to be part of that clan, what made them special, unique. Maiko turned to Todd. Their sole purpose was to avoid another war. Of course, as times changed, the clans merged, and these positions became rarer and more prestigious. They ranked higher than any diplomat and were extremely important to the group they were with, and later, extremely important to the clans. The goal was simple. We wanted peace. Their job was to build peace. Todd looked at him. So I'm a peace offering? Michael was quiet, his eyes narrowed, confused by the comment. Todd waved off his hand. Never mind. As you wish, Maiko continued. We haven't used this position in hundreds of years. After the clan war, there was no reason. We were at peace, and we had to focus on rebuilding our world. But now, after the attack and all those deaths, plus the fear that more conflict may come, we hope with you here, we can stop it and build peace between our people. So that is a little bit from Conviction. So you can kind of leave it up to you to figure out what is going on. That is an abridged part of the story there. I had to edit it down for the reading, so there's a little more that goes on in the conversation. But yeah. So those are our readings, everybody. So I thought now would be a good time for some questions and answers. We do have some people in our chat. Let them come up with some questions. But in the meantime, I want to ask the group, what draws you to sci-fi, fantasy, paranormal? What draws you to this genre of writing? And E.D.E, we'll start with you.
Yes, I have I have an engineering background, so I answer everything like yes and no and maybe and it depends. But I actually have a pretty solid answer to this question, which is I'll speak to fantasy, but sci-fi is similar. Has a duality that I really appreciate in the sense that it's an escape, and a lot of people think it's only an escape, but it's also about the world and about changing it and about evaluating, about critiquing it. And both are happening at the same time. People say, well, if it's so serious, is it fun? And it's both, right? A good fantasy story does, especially for people with mental health issues and various things, a fantasy story takes them, away, but it also brings you to the world and how we can make the world better. And I think that both of those things combined are really powerful, at least to me.
Ava, what about you?
Well, I've mentioned this before, but for new listeners, I am an engineer and I work as a researcher. And not once, but many times, I have been baffled by the way science fiction has influenced our technological progress. So, for instance, the automated doors in Star Trek are now in our lives. I've some sort of technology that doesn't exist yet in different work has influenced some real world research that now exists and we can make use of it. So, what draws me to science fiction in particular is attempting to do the same, attempting to imagine the impossible that we cannot write about scientifically right now because we cannot build it, or we don't have the math, or we don't have the technology yet. And what draws me to fantasy is to go beyond that and imagine everything that doesn't exist and cannot possibly exist in this world, in this timeline, in this dimension, you know. And it's this amazing potential that science fiction and fantasy is what draws me to it. We can make all the choices and we can encounter all the creatures and we can have all the types of societies that we don't have here. And I like that very
Me too.
much.
Well, I mean, so there's many different reasons why I enjoy fantasy, sci-fi, paranormal. One of them on the shallow end is that real life is extremely boring. And when I go in to read something and I want to be in a different world or in a world where exciting things happen. I mean, not that exciting things don't happen in the real world, but I just prefer to take a break from reality. But at the same time, I think that genre fiction is very good at getting to truths through metaphor. For example, in my book, Curses Foiled Again, which I just read my main character, the mortal character John, is under a curse that was passed down through generations of his family, and it has made him very depressed and given up on life. And I myself, I have bipolar disorder, which is passed down through my family. And it was something that I had a real hard time struggling with, before I was diagnosed, after I was diagnosed. And so that it felt like a curse to me. And then you have to move past that, though. And so the way John moves past it in the book, and opening yourself to the idea that the feelings that you have, even the negative ones, are things you still want to keep because they make you human. Yeah, so I think that fantasy and sci-fi and other alternate reality books are very conducive to speaking about difficult things through the magic of metaphor.
Excellent. Yeah, that's spot on. And for me, why I chose to write, or what draws me to sci-fi and fantasy, is I've always liked the what ifs. It's like, well, what would happen if this happened? What would happen if that happened? In my New World series, is basically I took right now and said, well, prior to the pandemic, I took right now and said, what if aliens showed up? Not here to invade us, not here to attack us, not needing resources or anything like that, but truly in need. Kind of like immigrants coming to the United States. But with aliens, you can't ignore them. You can't pretend that they don't exist. You can't build a wall. You can't say no. They're there. They have giant ships, and basically, if push comes to shove, they can destroy you from space and not even have to get their hands dirty. Luckily, these aliens aren't like that. So I like to play with those ideas and concepts of what if this happens, what if that happens? How do we react? How does it change our worldview on everything? Suddenly, when you're in a fantasy book or a sci-fi book, you can address all those things. You can play with it, and you can basically hold up a mirror to society and say, this is what you need to think about, because we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And hey, if something like that happens, is it really going to be important? Who loves who's with who somebody is, who somebody life is, where somebody comes from. That's not really going to be important anymore. So that's the stuff that I like to play with. Plus, the technology is really cool. You get to invent all sorts of fun stuff, even with fantasy, right? One of a question that came in from Bethany. I really enjoyed the readings. Thank you so much for sharing. For those who have written both sci-fi and fantasy, do you find one genre easier or more difficult? So instead of starting with Emily, we're going to start with Sera.
Well, I don't write sci-fi. I'm a big sci-fi fan, but I feel a little intimidated by the technology. So I'm very interested to hear Ava's take on this. But generally speaking, like I don't, writing paranormal and writing fantasy can be a little more difficult because you do have to world build from the ground up. You can't. I mean, obviously, you're going to borrow tropes from your genre, but you do have to create a world, and that's something I really enjoy doing. But it takes a lot because you can't take anything for granted. And yeah, but whereas if you're writing paranormal, something that's taking place in this world, that does involve world building too. Like you have to decide how your magic system works, what kind of creatures there are, what is the straight world's reaction to, are they hidden? Are they part of society? What, so there is world building too, but you can always lean back on stuff that actually exists. So.
Yeah, very true. Very true. Ava, what about you?
Well, so I think there is an echo for me too. It's like making cookies and making soup. When you bake cookies, you need to be very careful at quantities because otherwise you won't get good cookies, and you might not get cookies at all, but like hard, weird masses of stuff that might have been edible at some point. But when you make soup, you can just put everything in there and let it. So it really depends on the story. Because sometimes for some stories, it is very easy to write science fiction. And for others, it might be very easy to write fantasy. So, for instance, if I have a science fiction story that is set in the near future, I don't have to go far away from the realities, from the technical realities of today. But in 2011, I started working on my first novel, which is not finished and it's not published. So, but I will tell you about the concept. It's a fantasy story set in space. It is set in a different galaxy with a different type of culture, with a different type of beings. They are not human. And for that one, I have to build everything. I don't know anything about them, right? So that is a lot like a fantasy setting in which you want to write about elves and so on. But for instance, let's take urban fantasy story and set it now in our present. But we have pixies and we have tricksters and we have magic users. And for that, you can build upon the world that exists now. They can have cell phones and they can call each other and they can add a little bit of magic. So honestly, it depends on the kind of story you want to write. So cookies or soup or I don't know, maybe pilaf.
Very cool. Very cool. Emily, what about you?
I can't do much better than Ava's cookies and soup answer, honestly, but I would say I mostly write fantasy just because I do agree it's about the story. I've written a little sci-fi, but to me, they're both different types of how you bend creativity and the world building. They both have, one is not really more restrictive than the other, but they go in different dimensions, and I like the lack of restraint that fantasy has in terms of you really can just do these things that are not, of our world. And I just enjoy that more. So to me, I guess one thing I would add to that answer is people tend to find it easier to write things that they enjoy writing, and I enjoy writing fantasy, so that would be part of my answer.
Yeah, no, that's great. So for my answer to this question, because I do write a little bit of urban fantasy. Well, I write urban fantasy and I write sci-fi. Kind of like what Sera said is I do like the world building. So in A New World or in Conviction and in Contact, I had to create an alien race, which meant I had to create a society, which meant I had to create a language and a culture and an education system and a government system and 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 I've got probably 70 pages of history on the Nintri, including their alphabet, their language, and basically anything that anybody would ever want to know. None of it, not most of it, doesn't get into the books, but it's there. And so creating all that information, and having it just as a resource is very, very cool. And I did that some with like my urban fantasy and some of the fantasy stories too. You have to create the rules. You have to create the Bible. And, you kind of have to hope that you don't paint yourself into a corner, because getting out of it can be really challenging. And at least with sci-fi, you can kind of wave the magic wand of, ooh, technology. And with fantasy, I find that you can wave the magic wand of magic when you get into those problems. So yeah, I mean, for me, it's a little bit of those things, and I don't find one more difficult than the other. I think that they both are in general just a lot of fun and give you all sorts of wiggle room and playroom. See, one of the comments here was directed to Ava, as long as there's garlic in both the cookie and the soup, right?
Yes, garlic is very, very important. Without garlic, you cannot live a full life. You always must have garlic in your pocket, garlic in your soup, and garlic. I will make garlic cookies and let you know. I'm joking. I'm joking. So this is the garlic land. We have garlic in most dishes over here, but I think Emily knows more about garlic than I do.
I do really like garlic. I have a garlic garden in my backyard here in Michigan, so garlic is, and I will eat the garlic cookies. That has got to happen.
Garlic cookie, I think,
making like a savory kind of thing. I'd try it.
So I live not too far from Gilroy, California, which is the garlic capital, and they have a garlic festival every year. I'm sure somebody's done garlic cookies because they have garlic ice cream, and I'm just like, oh, it's not my favorite, but God bless you if you do enjoy it. So let's see what we got here.
Rosemary. Anyway,
I'm sorry, what was that, Emily?
Salt and rosemary in the cookie. I don't know. We need a panel on garlic cookies now.
Garlic, yeah. Now there you go. We're gonna have a panel discussion.
Yeah, Minerva too. We've got a mission now. Anyway,
well, Minerva said they would definitely eat it. So we got a victim. I mean, a test subject. So I want to start wrapping up because I know some folks got to jump onto other panels, including myself. So before we take off, let's have some closing thoughts from everybody. And Ava, we'll start with you.
All my thoughts have run away. No, help me, please. That was very, very unexpected.
Would you like me to come
back? If you want a minute.
Yeah, go ahead,
if you want a
Sera.
minute, I can go because I just have, I mean, this isn't so much closing thoughts exactly, but just to touch on what we were talking about before with world building and stuff. I mean, you can wave your magic wand. You have to be very careful that you're consistent within your world. So you can make any rule that you want, but you have to make sure that everything obeys whatever rules that you set out. So yeah, there has to be consistency in your fantasy, or else the spell is broken and readers go, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. But
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
I agree with you 100%. You have to, if you have rules, you have to live and you have to die by them. So be careful with the rules you create.
Exactly.
So let's do, instead of giving final thoughts, Emily, where can people find you, find your books? And this is your chance to plug. Plug.
All right. Yeah. So my brand is me, and I write books, and I like them, and I hope you will too. And all of my social media links and my links and everything are on my website, which is like the name you see somewhere up there, which is edebell.com. So if you go to edebell.com, there's links to all the social media. I have a Discord that I hang out and come chat with me sometime, and you can check out all the books. And I do want to add one thing. Diamond Song is a very long form. I love long form fantasy, but I do have a lot of really short stuff, especially with 2020 and all that. Like I even have a book I just realized. Like I just released my Just Bart, who is not cow, not boy, so I don't know what to call it, but it's a good. Well, I have a lot of stuff that's short for our attention spans right now, and you can check all that out as well.
Great.
And thank you for having me on this. It was fun.
My pleasure. Ava, what about you?
Well, you can find my stuff at avakellyfiction.com. You can find me on Twitter as Thunder Eternal if you want to know garlic facts and some vampire facts, and just have fun with me over there, and my adoration of dragons. So I'm also on Discord right now, so you can drop by and chat. And I think we should all put the links for our books on Discord and maybe in the chat for this stream so people have them. Yeah.
Sera, what about you? Where can people find you and your books?
You can go to www.seratrevor.com. That's SERA Trevor.com. That has all my information. My brand is like I said, I write over several genres. Most of my books are fantasy, but I also have a paranormal, and I do have some contemporary books. The unifying factor is I've been told that all of my stories are very fable or fairy tale kind of inspired, and so I like to take those tropes and twist them on their head and see what happens. So yeah, I will also be on the Discord if you want to talk to me, and thanks so much for having me.
Excellent. And as for me, well, you can find me at www.mdnew.com, and that's NEU as spelt right over there in my little name there. And let's see, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, Facebook, all of which are basically MD New. So if you type in any of that into any of those social media platforms, you'll find me. I do have, my publisher is 9 Star Press, so all of my books are there, and you can find everything about my books usually on Amazon or Goodreads or on my website. So thank you all for joining us. Some of us will jump over to the Discord stream shortly. In the meantime, if you want to find all of these great books, I hope all of these great books are listed in the Icarus Book.com bookstore. I suggest you go there. Or as Ava said, we'll be popping in links and stuff like that to the video chat and everything like that a little later. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. Have a great afternoon, and we'll see you in a few minutes at the at another panel. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.